Coming up on today's show, Holly is a children's performing artist and educator who is passionate about families of all shapes and sizes. Over the past 10 years, she's become a mother through years of fertility treatments and is still coping with the loss of 7 miscarriages along the way. Through it all, her husband, bonus hubby, and support system has been there. She and her partners are now raising their living children and supporting each other as they work towards furthering their careers and learning to navigate an alternative family structure in the conservative South. Holly is a passionate advocate for reproductive rights and education, infertility, pregnancy loss awareness, and creating parental rights for non-biological family structures. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really thrilled to be here with Holly, whom I've met through our online private Facebook community at Loving Without Boundaries, Healthy Open Relationships and Lifestyle Freedom. If you're not part of our group and you're looking for a community, that's a great place to start. And in there, I always do a Photo Friday post, just to get to know all of our community. And that's how I met Holly, because she was posting photos of her beautiful and amazing family. And I thought, wow, this would be an amazing conversation to have to share her journey and her story with all of our listeners here. So Holly, thank you for saying yes and for being here and giving us your time and sharing a little bit about you and your background.
Absolutely, Kitty. I'm really glad to be here.
Wonderful. Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so I've already read your bio to everybody, but I like to just give you a moment to tell everyone about yourself in your own words here.
Yeah, absolutely. As in regards to the community itself, I am a hetero-flexible polyamorous woman in a V with my husband and bonus hubby. We're in our early mid-30s. We live in the South, and we are kind of going through that journey of raising 3 strong, young, independent little people. And then we have 1 adult kiddo, and kind of helping guide their journey in our non-traditional family structure and just all of the bumps in the roads as we continue to try and grow our family.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm glad that you found our community. And I really appreciate you having this conversation with me today. So and thanks for just, vulnerably sharing all that. I identify also as heteroflexible. Mm-hmm. I'm also in a V. That I happen to be in my mid-50s, not my mid-30s. And I'm sure we'll get into it in our conversation. And I don't have children. We were talking about that before we started recording. But what I'd love to start with is just asking you, since you are in an untraditional family structure with 2 other adults there, when you were growing up, was there ever a moment or maybe a series of moments when you realized that maybe monogamy or a traditional sort of a setup was not maybe going to work out for you, or that maybe that realization come to you a little later on? Just tell me a little bit about what I call your light bulb moment.
I think I had like the fairy lights that just slowly twinkle on and off. I think I had some of those throughout early childhood and on into my teens and 20s. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian background. So like very, very conservative, women and children should be seen and not heard. That was kind of where I started my life. My parents, they're wonderful parents. They were part of like a homeschool community that was really, really tight and really small, early 90s. And during that, I did not resonate well with like the help meet style of marriage. I knew people who were betrothed. I knew people who were in arranged marriages. And I think my parents started being like, oh, this is a little much for us, and kind of went back. They were still conservative Christian, but not as much. And by then I'm like moving in middle high school. And I noticed in, that purity culture, right, where everybody did the purity rings and no sex before marriage. And I was like, this is really weird. Like I didn't say any of that out loud, and I wasn't forced. Some people were really forced, but I just ascribed to it because that's all I'd really known. And I was like, well, I guess this is what we do. But I was also at the same time working in like community and then professional theater as a young like teenager. And in that world, everything is very inclusive most of the time. You have a lot of people that were kind of pushed out of the conservative culture. And I kind of had this double life going. So here I can kind of express myself sexually, artistically, however I want. I can have different types of relationships. I was really, I would push back heavily against titles. I did not want to be anyone's girlfriend. I liked getting to know people. I liked experimenting and figuring myself out romantically, sexually. But it would get to that point where a boy would be like, well, are you going to be my girlfriend? And I'd be like, no, we can keep getting to know each other. That's what I'm going to call it. But I'm not going to be your girlfriend. And that like toxic monogamy starts young. And I think for me, it was this, I just never wanted to, I guess what normally is called settling down. I didn't see myself doing that in the same way. And so I was staying in the arts, and I got away from that super conservative culture when I went to college, and I majored in theater and had that degree. But I did meet my husband there, and we got married really young because it was still a pretty conservative university. And that was kind of that bubble you were in. Everybody met and got married young. And people couldn't understand why, like, when he and I would play opposite other people and we'd have to kiss on stage and we'd have other, like, fake relationships. I've never struggled with jealousy. And it didn't bother me at all. And I just thought it was funny that they'd ask. I don't remember the day that he asked me to be his girlfriend. It didn't happen. We were together. And somebody was like, well, when did you start dating? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And they, when did he ask you to be your girlfriend? And I went to him and I was like, did you ever ask me to be your girlfriend? Is that a thing? But we were young kids, and we just followed that pattern. So after getting married, I started recognizing some of those tendencies I had younger in my earlier life. We got married because that's what you did. Not because that's what you need. And I mean, my husband and I, we are still very happily married, but it looks very different from a lot of the more traditional dynamics that other people have had. So we just kind of hit some of those markers at different points. I had, my first romantic experience with a woman after I was married.
Okay.
And we started in kind of that, I hesitate to say swinging culture, but it kind of was. That was my first tiptoe in. We had a couple experiences, and then I went and learned a lot about it and tried to understand what ethically was okay. We were married, we were in this dynamic, and I got really tired of being unicorn hunted. So we kind of took a step back from that, and in the background, infertility was coming into play around then. So I had a lot of those reoccurring thoughts and concepts.
So just to thank you for, again, just so vulnerably sharing here. And I'm sure your story will definitely resonate with a lot of people, including the tired of being unicorn hunted, the fundamentalist Christian background, the toxic monogamy. Maybe not so much that you didn't feel any jealousy, but that's good on you. That's awesome. But so I'm curious, when did your bout with dealing with infertility start? Was that maybe in your late 20s?
So we got married when I was 22. And our hope, I've always wanted to be a mom. Like, we really wanted to try young. We were still really young, and we tried different forms of contraceptive, and my body wasn't responding well. Like, it was just really hard for me to be on birth control medications. I tried several. And we were like, you know what? When it happens, it'll be fine. And then it didn't. And then it didn't. And I was young, right? So I was, 23, 24, 25, 26. All through that time, I would go in for like my yearly exams and checkups and stuff. And I'd be like, hey, we've not been on birth control this whole time. And like, we weren't trying. Now we are. And like, nothing's happening. And doctors would look at me, they'd look at my husband. They'd be like, you guys are just stressed, just keep trying. Don't worry about it. It'll happen when you're not thinking about it. And I would push just a little bit, but I am not someone who is very assertive. I'm working on that, but especially younger, I'm going into these doctors that are twice my age, and I'm like, I really want kids, and we've been trying for 2-3 years now. It's not happened. Is there anything we can do, or should we test for things? And they were like, well, everything looks good. Don't worry about it. So by the time, trying to think, I think my husband was 29-ish by the time they were like, so they did my full panel, because of course they checked everything in the woman first. They did all of my testing and everything looked okay. And then they were like, okay, well, let's check his sperm. And he had virtually none. To be a healthy young man, we don't recognize as often male factor infertility. And I think it's this thing that like all of it's shrouded in mystery, right? We're just like, oh, it'll happen. Don't worry. But the reality is when we say that to people, we're making them feel like the problem, right? Well, it must just be me. And if we don't have the facts and we don't have the information and we're not given the resources, we can't even advocate for those needs. So he did a round of hormones to see if we could like boost some of the sperm production and stuff, and things were just tanking. It was getting worse. He did a surgery. It was getting worse. And they were like, at this point, you're infertile. Like at this point, he can't have kids outside. Like we were looking at maybe trying to do an IUI, and I can explain all of those things, but we were moving towards treatment and doing hormones. But if you don't have sperm, you can't get pregnant. So we got skipped in the IUI process and went straight to IVF. And when you're 29, 30 years old and early in your career, you don't have $30,000 laying around to just do fertility treatments.
Right.
So we were like, okay. So we had to like put it on pause. We had almost 9 years between when we first started trying to get pregnant to when we finally got pregnant with our youngest.
Wow. That is rough. And that was, so thank you for sharing all of that again, so vulnerably, and I'll share some of my story when it feels appropriate as well.
Sure.
So then when did your other partner come into the picture then, if I may ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like going back timeline wise, so we had experienced some of like the swinging culture. I realized that I needed more like actual connection with my partners, and I didn't really want to continue more in just like a sexual capacity. I wanted to have relationships with the people that I cared about. And going through infertility treatments, if I'm on all these drugs to make me super fertile, I wasn't comfortable like swinging. That was not going to be on the table. So I had been like on the apps and trying to like date a little bit digitally, and I got sick of couples, and I was like, okay, I'm going to just try and have a relationship with a woman. I've never done that before. And we met, my bonus hubby and we met through a mutual partner at the time, his partner. So through that, we met digitally first, and then I went to visit them. They lived about 3 hours away, and they already had 3-year-old, just turning 4-year-old twin girls. And so I was coming into the picture. Like I had met digitally, we debated on how to meet up, and we were like, you know what? We'll just come for like the weekend, and there's a guest room on the other side of the house. You'll have like your own space, and we can just like see if there's any chemistry, just see what it's like. And they also, if they were going to date someone, they wanted somebody who would get along well with the kids. So this was kind of a 2-for-1. Quick, come over for dinner, see you, bye, next morning. And I got snowed in. like overnight. I got snowed in for 10 days.
Wow.
And that doesn't happen in the South. It doesn't. But when it does, they're not ready for it, you know?
Right.
So the roads were treacherous. It was terrifying. But the good news was we did get along. The kids and I, I was very careful in stepping into their lives as a friend first. And we didn't really know what this was going to look like. Initially, I wasn't even there to meet my now bonus hubby. I was there to meet his partner, and we hit it off. So he and I, we began a relationship that started primarily as kind of co-parent-esque of these 3 just turning 4-year-old kiddos together, and an adult child who was still like living at home. I say child, but he's like barely 10 years younger than me. But I got to meet everybody, and I remember calling my husband, who was back at home 3 hours away, snowed in as well, and being like, "This is changing my life. Like this is something I didn't know that I wanted, and it's not going to replace anything else. It doesn't change the fact that I want biological kids too. But I think this is family, and I can't wait for you to meet them."
Wow.
And so it was wild. Like it happened very
And so this
quickly.
was a husband and wife and children, is that right?
Yes. And husband and wife, they're no longer together. But through that process, I was able to kind of very slowly see their family dynamic and my husband and I's dynamic, and we just slowly meshed because we were long distance. We would kind of take turns coming and visiting, you know what I mean? Like they might come see me, I would go see them. And like my husband and my bonus hubby, like they're some best friends. Like they get along swimmingly. We do so much together. And I mean, that like at the time I wouldn't have known we would decide to move in together and raise kids together and like just live this really wild, awesome life together. But it was a journey. And about a month after meeting my bonus hubby is when we got the all clear to do IVF.
Wow.
So yeah. So between my husband back home, who I lived with at the time primarily, and my like extended poly fam, both of the guys did shots for me all through getting pregnant. They were with me through the loss of our first miscarriages, and they were both there the day that I had our youngest, our daughter. They were there at the hospital. The nurses were very nervous because bonus hubby came in. It was also the tail end of COVID, you know? So like he came into the hospital and those nurses were like, "Ma'am, there's another gentleman here to see you," you know? And I explained enough to be like, "Yeah, let him on in." Like I was breastfeeding and I didn't, you know, it's fine. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure it's good." But no, it's amazing to watch, like our kids appreciate the parentage of all 3 of us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's phenomenal to see that. Like, I mean, when our youngest was learning to talk, she called them both daddy. And now she can like differentiate and add a first name too if she wants to. But it's just really cool. So that's the long-winded answer.
That is amazing. What an inspiring story. I love all of that, including that, you know, it's also a beautiful story that you eventually, of course, were able to have your own kids and that your youngest calls them both daddy. That's awesome. So I'm curious, when did your legal husband first meet your bonus hubby before he was your bonus hubby?
Well, they met less than a month, I think, like probably 3 weeks after I met bonus hubby. We all like I was a teacher at the time. I taught full-time elementary school. And I was on spring break. So we like went there and visited because it was easier for my husband and I to travel with our dogs than it was for the whole gang to come up and see us in our apartment. So yeah, we went and visited. And I mean, I don't know what I expected, but it was far more relaxed than I think most people would maybe think. I think there's this idea of it all being really titillating and nerve wracking and, oh, is he, will they, what's going to happen, and it's not that, if you can communicate, I mean, sure, we're human, we're people, we're going to make mistakes, but all throughout the process, I think we did a really good job of having feelings chats, right? If somebody had a big feeling, we'd kind of like pump the brakes for a second and navigate that big feeling and make sure that everybody is comfortable. We're still not on this trajectory of like a relationship escalator, as a lot of people are. There's not really a need for that. And everything just kind of fell into place. Like, I never told the kids what to call me. They called me their fairy godmother from like day 2.
That's so cool.
And they came to that on their own. I mean, like, I'm a big Disney buff, and my husband and I worked there for a short time. And I guess maybe they heard us talking about that in passing. But they like, that's what, when our youngest was born, they were like, we have a fairy god sister now. Like, it happened really organically. It could not have been orchestrated that way.
Wow, that's really amazing. So when did the families start to move in together? Your bonus hubby?
Cohabitation, yeah.
So
we were going back, and we can talk more about it if you want later, but in going through the fertility struggles and stuff, very few places provide assistance to help with funding of treatment. My husband actually had to quit the job that he had, and he went to work for Starbucks, actually, a company that did provide fertility treatment insurance. And a lot of people don't realize that, but some companies are starting to help with that. And so he was working there until our child was born, and then he was ready to jump back into a different career path. But he needed to do that for the extent of my pregnancy for us to have coverage. It's just exorbitantly expensive to go through that. Where Bonus Hubby had actually, about midway through my pregnancy, he had a job shift. He had a job offer in another state, which was actually where we live now. And it was my home state. So he went ahead with the rest of the family, the clan, and they picked up and moved like 8.5 hours away from me, middle of our pregnancy, with the game plan of like, previous to that, they talked about relocating where we were. And we were like, you know what, we'll follow y'all. Y'all go get settled, find a house, get comfortable. We're gonna have this baby safely. And once she's here safely, we'll figure out how to be together. And it worked out in a way to where when the baby was about a month old, we were moving. We moved to be together. So to cohabitate in the same space. They had already bought a house and got everything set up. And there was a job waiting for my husband. And I was able to move into the role of stay-at-home parent. I'd never, since the time I was a teenager, I've never not worked basically full time, even through school, but I'd always wanted to get to be a mom. And with the twins, they were about to start kindergarten that fall. So it worked in such a way that I was able to be the person, there to get the kids when they got home from school and, all the things. And we just, again, I think there was a little apprehension of how is this going to go. And there are a lot of pitfalls. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of things that can be complicated. We went about it as, because again, where we live, we couldn't be completely out to everyone. They don't need to know all of our business. And for the safety of our kids, and honestly, for the guys' jobs, it just wasn't practical to be completely transparent with everybody all the time. So we kind of went with it as it's a split level house, and my husband and I were going to rent the lower house portion. So it's completely separate spaces that can also connect. And I mean, clearly that's how we lived. And that was great and fantastic, and it's been really, really positive. I mean, sure, there are growing pains, but that's how it went to be. So that was the spring of 22. Yeah, spring of 22, because the baby just turned 2.
Wow. What a journey. So just make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So you have your daughter and you had her through IVF.
Yes.
And does that mean it's your biological child with your
My
legal husband?
My legal husband. Yes.
So they were able to figure out the whole term thing.
So through with IVF. Yeah, I know. Pins and needles. Yes, through IVF, that is why we got transferred to that, because whether you have active sperm or not, they can take genetic material and basically build sperm if necessary. And when you do IVF, they retrieve the egg from your body, right? And then they can fertilize that externally of the body, and then put that back in when you're ovulating to impregnate. I can give an overview of the two procedures if that's helpful. I don't know if it is or not.
I think it could be very interesting, as some of my listeners know this, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more here. Yeah. So we have a lot of things in common, and then some things that don't overlap, right? So I met my husband. I was a serial monogamous cheater for the first part of my life. And then I eventually figured out there was this thing called open relationships, and I didn't want to cheat anymore. And so I eventually met my now husband on Match.com back when I still had a monogamous mindset, as did he. But we just had some really honest conversations about, we both had a colored past of cheating, and we didn't want to do that to each other. So when we did eventually get married, we just left out the forsake all others in our vows. Yes. And we got married out by a lighthouse, not in a church.
I love that.
Yeah. And so by the time we got married, I was 37, he was 36. And when my mother was 39 when she had me. And I don't know why, I was very naive, and I just never thought I would ever have any fertility issues, partly because my mother was 39 when she had me, you know. Right. And so by the time we started to try to have children, it wasn't till about 39 or 40, partly because my husband wasn't 100% sure if he wanted kids or not. I was like kind of 60% for kids. He was like 40%. And we were like, yeah, it's close enough. Let's go ahead and get married, you know, because that, of course, can be a big reason not to get married if you're on completely different ends of the spectrum. So by the time he was ready, you know, and I was ready too, I was 39, and same as you, we tried for about 6 months to a year. And at that age, that's when you're supposed to go get checked out. And so we got checked out, and lo and behold, I had 39-year-old eggs.
Oh.
And it turned out that, yeah. And it turned out that my husband had not the greatest sperm, you know, so we joke around that they were slow swimmers and they had 2 heads, and, you know, we kind of just made a joke about it.
Right.
Just to get through it, because if you can't laugh, you know, we would just cry through that whole ordeal. And we also went right for IVF. We went over the IUI, went right for IVF, and we did 2 rounds. One was called a natural cycle, where they take just 1 egg and take one of his best sperms that they could get, and that didn't work. So then we did the traditional route, and like you were saying, this is all out of pocket. So we spent, it was over $30,000, you know, in cash, that, you know, insurance covered none of it. And then that second round didn't work either. And it was very upsetting because they had 2 embryos, and I was driving to to get them implanted. And they called me while I was driving on this kind of like really curvy road that was a little bit dangerous to tell me not to come because the embryos had died. And so it was obviously very, very devastating. And after that, I just told my husband, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. This is just too hard, you know, and we never even got to the point where we had a miscarriage because I just could not seem to get pregnant. And we eventually decided that not to adopt. And that's partly why I do the work that I do today, just in terms of, I really believe that the work that I'm doing is helping nurture amazing, beautiful, adults who are coloring outside the lines of heteronormative monogamy in some way. And that's the legacy that I'm leaving, right? Instead of raising my own biological children. So that's kind of how I came through all that. But so, some of it is similar to you and some of it is not. But I definitely, when I was going through it, I thought I must be one of the only polyamorous infertile women out here. I knew out of 8 million people that was not the case, but where else are you going to find polyamorous infertile people to talk to, right? So I really appreciate you just being so courageous and brave and sharing your story here, because I'm sure that people who are listening to this, they're either going to empathize with what we're saying or nodding their heads going, yep, that's my story in some way, shape, or form too, or I see myself in that story. So with that, I'd love to give the proverbial mic back over to you, and whatever you'd like to share about maybe the kind of the ins and outs of what you went through, in case that's helpful for anybody.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, because it is, I mean, I know you do this now, like you do the podcast and you talk openly, but no matter how many times you describe that to someone, there is nothing you can do that like completely numbs that feeling. There's so much vulnerability. It's such a hard thing, and it's not talked about. Whether you are monogamous or monogamish or polyamorous or whatever, it is not something that we speak very openly about, because it is like, between infertility and miscarriage, both things kind of fall to the woman, like it's almost their fault. Like that's just kind of the way our society sees that. And I think the more that we do open up, the more we can find that community, right? We can find other people that we can relate to, and that they can feel empowered to hear our stories.
Absolutely.
So, I can absolutely speak to my experience. We, like you said, we both skipped over IUI, and I think if you're not familiar with all the terminology that kind of like hangs in the balance around this subject, it can get a little complex. So IUI, for anybody who, and I'm not a medical professional, but like having gone through this, I think you would agree, the descriptions, like an IUI is an interuterine insemination. So it's not removing the egg from your body. You go through cycles of hormones to help your body to ovulate correctly. And when you're at a certain point, the doctor will inseminate you with sperm, whether that's from a donor or your spouse or whoever, and you hopefully get pregnant from that. The reason a lot of people start there, though, like as you, I'm sure, know, having paid out of pocket, is because that is closer to the like $500 to $4,000 range. Now, that doesn't include being monitored at a doctor's office or anything like that, and that doesn't include hormones and medication. But for the actual procedure, the round itself, it is much more like, I won't say affordable, but that is like a tangible number, right? Mm-hmm. That's a number that we as people can be like, okay, like we'll tighten our belts, but we'll figure that out, right?
Right.
The downside of that is if you're dealing with a higher level or a higher risk issue when it comes to infertility, the likelihood of that taking inside the body is lower, because there's no way to make the sperm meet the egg, right? You don't know that it's going to fertilize. You don't have a way to force implantation. But you go through a lot of the preemptive stuff, the testing and all of that either way. And they kind of make a call from there. It's less stigmatized too. I feel like that, because you're not having to remove anything from your body, because there's that whole side. And I mean, if you went through this, you probably remember, like when you're going through IVF, that the difference of that is you're having to retrieve genetic material from the body, right? So you're retrieving, or you said you did a natural round first, correct? So you just did one, and yes, okay. But either way, you have something coming out of your body and going to an endocrinologist or whoever, and they're babysitting that material and going to try and fertilize it. And like in my case, we didn't do that. We went straight for like the traditional remove multiple eggs. I had a lower protocol because I was younger, and they did like a mini cycle. So I wasn't super up on the hormones, but I still retrieved, I want to say like 19 eggs.
Oh, wow.
It was a ton of eggs. And when you go through the fertilizing section, so like when they take the sperm and they try and make sure that the eggs can grow, and then we were going to do a frozen cycle. So they had to freeze the ones that made it to day 5 and day 6, and then they grade them. And that process is arduous and painful because you're losing eggs along the way, right? Like you lost yours. That's traumatic too, because, you know, that's fertile years, right? In your body, that's over a year or more of fertility, depending on how many eggs are retrieved, and then you're losing them along the way. And the weirdest piece of that to me, I think, was we had all this paperwork coming back from, you know, because you have to pay to freeze everything, pay to freeze the sperm, you pay to freeze the eggs, you pay to freeze any embryos that make it, all the different things. And I had to figure out a beneficiary if something were to happen to me. Like, who is going to take my embryos in the event that my husband and I die? And so here I am calling my sister-in-law and being like, hey, can I write you down if something happened? Like, that's such a strange conversation to try and have, and also to digest yourself. It's, I mean, they call it embryonic adoption, right? And, you know, in the event that we weren't to have any issue getting pregnant and we had a bunch left over, I had to decide if I was planning to let them be up for adoption for other families that needed embryos. And I have no issue filling out those forms in theory, but when you're faced with that kind of decision making, or when you have a cycle that doesn't take, so that's where I was. We had, we did a round of hormones, did the retrieval process. They decided we needed to wait to implant. So I went home, and the clinic that I used was actually out of state. So the way that we were able to do it in an affordable way, the clinic I used, it's called CNY Fertility, and they're in upstate New York. They have places all over the country now, but they're about a third of the cost of the national average. The national average is between 20 and 30,000, as you well know. And typically you have to pay up front or buy like every cycle. And like how do you come up with that? Right. So people are going into major medical debt to make this happen. The nicest thing that this clinic could do, while it's high volume, meaning they have lots and lots of people that come to them and travel from all over the world, they make it affordable. They give you payment plan options. And again, it's only about a third of the cost of the national average. And they can help you ship your medication. And they're used to taking clients. I say clients. They're used to taking patients. We're from all over the world. And so they do travel well. And so every cycle I did, I had to fly to upstate New York to see my doctor, to go to the clinic, to implant, to do the whole thing, and then fly home to a monitoring doctor who would then take my results and send them back and forth.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
It is. And so we did a cycle, and we decided to go for twins because I had 9 eggs. It was 9. Yes, 9. 9 eggs that made it to freeze. 9 embryos, pardon me, that made it to freeze. And so we implanted 2, and I made it a few days, and we went back for like confirmation that they were growing properly, and they were both miscarrying, early miscarriage. And then I didn't understand at the time that when you're in the middle of a cycle and it doesn't take, you have to make a decision that day if you're going to do another round immediately. Because what a lot of people don't realize, and I had not experienced a miscarriage yet, but when you miscarry, your body tends to hyperovulate, meaning that it's extra fertile. You're more likely to get pregnant the next month. And so if I was going to continue, I was going to stay on the hormones and stay on all of the shots and everything leading up to my next transfer, even though I hadn't even miscarried the children I was currently carrying. And so I'm on the phone with my doctors and trying to make the best call and having to talk to my husband and figure out funds. And we were like, you know what? Let's go for it. And so I called Bonus Hubby too. And like being long distance made that hard because like, how much do you do? Like what can you do? And so being long distance from my people, from my doctors, we made the best call we could. And we said, let's go for it. Let's do the next month. My miscarriage happened like 2 days later. And
Wow.
I was at the store shopping and it just happened. And I was not prepared for that. I'd never been through that before. And it's, I mean, physically and emotionally, it's very painful. But knowing not only am I going through this right this second, I now, in 3 days, have to turn around and go show up at my appointment to start the next round again.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. People can't wrap their minds around the emotional toll, right? Because if you have a living child, or if you're pregnant enough that you're showing, or, you know, whatever along the way, people see that loss. But when you're going through infertility struggles, it's so private. And taking up space is hard. It's just hard. So I was really grateful to have an amazing support team. We made it work. We traveled. I rested as much as I could. We timed it so that I could do it over the summer. I wasn't teaching because your body, you know, you go through bloat and you feel terrible. And you're just trying your best not to be stressed.
Yeah.
Just relax. Thing in your life. Just relax.
Just relax. Yeah.
Right. And so when we came home from that round, you do the wait, and then I go back in for testing, and we had 2. They took. And we went back in for several different appointments because early with IVF, you have to make sure that it's taking. And I kept doing the shots. You do it most of the first trimester. At about week 12, I believe, I'll never forget, we went in to look for heartbeats. And at that appointment, we did hear one, but the other twin had vanished. So it was this incredibly emotional, beautiful thing to hear a heartbeat, you know, healthy, happy, safe. And then at the same time, the other one was gone.
Wow. Yeah.
So we had a very difficult pregnancy, but not because of the IVF. Like once we got to that point, I thankfully had chosen a doctor who was well versed in dealing with high risk pregnancies, and I was able to stay with him the whole time. But like she came out perfect. She didn't need any NICU time. She was early by 3 weeks. And I had been in labor nearly a month, but like we made it. We got there.
Wow. Yeah.
And so when she was right at about a year old, we decided we were going to try again. And by that point, like fast forward in the rest of our timeline, we were now all living together as a family. We had relocated and been there about a year, which meant I was going to find a new monitoring clinic and all the things. But I knew, you know, I already had embryos. I had healthy, safe embryos that were frozen on ice in Syracuse, New York. So I just needed to figure out how to get there. And we did a round in September, and it started to take, and we lost both of those babies.
Wow.
And then we did, after I miscarried, both of those, we decided to do one more round. That was really all we could afford. And while that one also did not take, and I don't know what the end of our fertility journey is going to look like, because we would love more kids. But like I said earlier, my husband has no sperm left. And I don't know that I can stomach going through the retrieval process. I don't know that he even has enough at this point that they could like medically make enough sperm work, kind of a thing. I know that is not the right terminology, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And my bonus hubby, like we even considered that, and that's not completely off the table, but he had a vasectomy about 6 years ago. So even to do that, it would require procedures one way or the other, whether that was me or him, or, you know. So that is kind of our journey, right? We have a beautiful, healthy 2-year-old. We have 7-year-old twins who are thriving and in school and healthy. And we have an adult child who is recently flown the nest and lives close to home and still comes home for dinner sometimes and is thriving.
Yeah.
But, we still have 7 miscarriages to mourn.
Yeah, yeah. Believe me, I get it. I get it in the sense that we've been on, again, very similar paths. And I honor your courage in telling your story, your strength, both emotionally and physically, and everything that you went through. After just the 2 rounds, I stopped because I hadn't even been through a miscarriage and I didn't know if I could get through that. So the fact that you went through 7 miscarriages, girl, I mean, I know how hard that is from the place that I'm sitting, even just with what I went through, it's such an invisible, misunderstood grief. Yes. And I wrote a different blog with my husband where we just kind of talked about that whole process. And it's just not honored in our culture to understand that, yeah, like we get when, I have a good friend who had a nephew die from cancer around the age of, I think it was 10. And, everyone understands that. Everyone gets it. There was a huge service at a church and a funeral and all of that. We all understand it. We flocked around that family to give them our love. Yet a lot of times when we're going through infertility, we might be dealing with it privately. So people don't even know that you're going through it, partly because of the stigma, right? Or the shame, possibly. But even if we do tell our loved ones, it almost felt worse when you didn't get any empathy or understanding, or why don't you just adopt things that people say, like,
it's not that simple.
No, it's not that simple. And sometimes that's not your journey. Like, it just didn't, and I won't go into too much of my side because this is an interview for you, but I mean, we did the research, we read the books, we looked at adoption agencies, and we just decided that didn't feel right either. And it's a very personal decision.
Oh, it is.
And it's not okay to like go put your beliefs on somebody else as if they should just, quote unquote, adopt those beliefs. And also, for all the just adopt people, that trope that people will say, if adoption is so wonderful, then why aren't all these other people doing that too? Like,
absolutely,
it's a privilege to have your own children. And if you can have your own children, that's what most people want to do. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think that is so true. The stats used to be 1 in 8 couples or 1 in 8, grown adults struggle with infertility. Now it is 1 in 6. That was changed, I think, 2 years ago. The everything was updated. And the reality is, adoption is this beautiful thing. And I'm not completely opposed to it, but I have also looked in the financing behind that, whether you do private, whether you do through an agent, like there are so many different factors. And it is taxing, especially if you've gone through half of the stuff that, like, trying to have your own kids. If you've gone through all these other treatments, the last thing in the world I would want is to adopt a child, not be ready for that myself emotionally, and or make them feel like a secondary prize. Like, that's not, children are not meant to be this thing that we like haggle over, and using that as like a pawn, we'll just go adopt one. That's inhumane for both parties,
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And there is so much more behind it. Like, one of the books I read, it definitely had some success, some beautiful stories in it. I don't remember the name of the book right now, but I mean, I would say, 60 to 70% of the stories in this book were horrible, so why put yourself through that, including the possibility that you could adopt a child that's then taken away from you. Like, that's where some of those stories were like. So I just couldn't go through any more heartache. And one thing I just want to clarify, and also just to show it a moment in time, but in case this is helpful to anybody, when I did the natural cycle, it was called, I don't know how many clinics do that. This was about maybe 15 years ago. It was retrieving the one egg, meaning like you're not spending the $4,000 on all the drugs. So they did have to go in and
Okay.
grab the one egg, and it was less expensive. It was like $5,000. And at the time, we were hopeful. I just thought if we could just get one egg with the one sperm, it's going to work, you know. And it totally didn't. And then when we did the full round, I was roughly about 39 years old. And at that time, it was $25,000. And at that age, they retrieved about, I want to say, 7 eggs. And then only 3 were able to move
Get to
into becoming
freeze.
an embryo. Yeah, to freeze. And then all by the time it was implantation day, all 3 of them had died. So just to, and again, like that, like you said, like that's that morning that how do you process it, let alone how does anyone else around you support you, you know? So it can just be very challenging to move through. But I thought I would share that too, just in terms of understanding like it's high stakes. It's high stakes when you're like, yay, they got 7 eggs. But, you know, like, but then, you know, for your situation, it's like, yay, they got 19 eggs. But either way, it's hard, right?
You lose along the way,
And
no matter what.
challenging emotionally. Exactly. Yeah. It's really, really challenging. Well, I really just want to, again, honor you for sharing your story and having the tenacity and the courage and also just to build that beautiful, unusual family, right? It's unusual in so many different ways, and you're doing it and you did it. And that's incredible and something to be celebrated. That's why as soon as I didn't even know about the history with the infertility when I saw you posting in our Facebook group, but I was like, wow, you know, like she's doing it. She's like got like this really cool family. We need to tell her story.
Oh,
And I appreciate that, you know, there's ups and downs, right? And you're doing it. You know, you got 3 kids at home, 3 adults, you merged, you know, and you're still on that journey of seeing like where that family building stage ends or doesn't end. And you're in the arena and
yes.
you're just I just really honor your tenacity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. I think that's a stat a lot of people don't recognize. So even if you make it, like you said, yours didn't make it through freeze, and I want to honor that. Those babies, they deserved a chance, and you did your best to give them one. And I have one that's still frozen on ice, essentially, and I've got to make a decision on that one, or continue to freeze, you know. But regardless, one of the weird like pushbacks I heard a lot and still hear sometimes is like, man, you fought so hard to get pregnant. Why ever would you want to do that again? And you're like, because she's sitting right there.
Right.
You know, yes, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. Oftentimes they're undetected because they're first trimester. We still medically don't totally understand miscarriage. There's so much that the medical community is just like, we don't know. We throw a little fairy dust on it and hope,
Yeah.
you know? And the reality is there are so many factors. And your fertility journey, 1, it's not your fault. No matter who you are, it's not your fault. You were given the genetics that you were given, and the way that your body deals with them and with whoever you procreate with, you are not in charge of how that works. That your body's working the way that you want or not, it sucks. But we can't control that, and you can't take responsibility for that. And that is a piece that I'm still working to like accept. But also, I think there's a little in that of like, you do all the things that you can do and you find a way to be at peace, whether that means stopping your journey of trying to conceive, whether that means adoption, whether that means being content with where your family is. If that's all adults and that you love each other, awesome. If you end up having little ones running around, cool. But like whatever that is for you, you finding your peace is essential to living that life, you know?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a really beautiful message. And I want to honor your time and start to wrap up our conversation here. So is there anything else that you would like to share or anything that like maybe I didn't ask you or a message that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I think specific to my story, I would say there have been, you know, the struggles there having like a therapist and a community of people in your life, whether that's partners, whether that's extended family, whether that is a community at large that you find digitally or close friends, but finding people that you have the courage to speak out to, because people can't support you if they don't know. I was not very open through the first, 3/4 of our journey to creating our family. And even once my husband and I were polyamorous, due to like our careers and stuff, I didn't feel safe being totally open and honest. And as I have, and I mean, sure, there are people that still don't necessarily understand, or people that I don't feel the need to be like really direct with about my life choices.
Mm-hmm.
But in finding that like community or that tribe, right? Those people that love you for you has been so helpful. I don't know how I would have gotten through the last quarter, of our journey without those people. I remember trying to explain the fertility stuff and what my polyamorous relationships looked like to one of my best friends. It was the first time I'd ever tried to like come out to anybody. Mm. And she thought I had cancer because of how nervous I was on the phone. I was like, we're okay. We're, I didn't know what I was doing. But the more you do it and the more you are intentional with the way that you're living, you don't have to share every single piece of yourself with every person on the street. But the more vulnerable you are, the more I have found people are either accepting or at least understanding. Like they may not get every piece of your journey, but finding people that do, and finding that that love and care, platonic or otherwise, of people who can be there with you through your life. Like that's what it's about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a really beautiful message to leave us with. And I just really feel a lot of warmth and kinship with you. And I'm just really delighted that you said yes to sharing your story. And
Thank
so
you
from my home to you, yeah, absolutely. From my home of 3 adults and a fur baby to yours, just, thank you. And I'm rooting for you and cheering you and your family on every step of the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.